I'd like to say that the studio exists only thanks to Stas.
But what a scoundrel he is. Though I wouldn't want to meet someone like that in real life.
When I play, I walk through the bog. Really love the cheerful mushroom guy from the Rotten Bog. Cannibals.
Once in my childhood, I washed up in a puddle.
Knock Knock Adventurers! The new knock on the Coffin Lid developer Video Diary is here. It's been just over a month since the last release, and during this time, the entire team has been working hard on the update, which was released last Friday. We have been searching for bugs together with you, and also doing many other things. And we will definitely talk about all of it, as well as touch on the topic of the path of the screenwriter of Knock on the Coffin Lid game and working on the lore. Today we have with us Stas, the screenwriter, Igor, narrative game designer, Andre aka Inri, founder of Red Boon Studio, and I'm Nastya, also known as Marfonia, the community manager for Knock on the Coffin Lid. A major update has been released, which the entire team has been working on and then testing together with you as part of the open beta test. The update was released last Friday, and besides fixing numerous bugs, inside you will see the updated Vanadis mechanics and her interaction with pets, many new travel notes, a new save file system, a quest log, and much, much more. But let's go in order. We want to draw special attention to the fact that all previously started runs must be forcibly completed in this patch. If the previous run is not completed and the player tries to continue it, this may lead to a save file break. Be careful, and it's better to start with a clean slate. Well, finally, our archer is ready for new adventures with new forces. Vanadis has become a more independent fighter since the deck split has disappeared. However, Vanadis' cards have the other side, and these cards can be played while playing as a pet. Vanadis also received a new stat connection. It affects the cards with this connection and can give very nice bonuses and help in battle. By the way, pets have also learned a few new tricks. For example, the summoning and recalling system for pets during combat is a new feature. However, always remember that each pet has a limited number of summons per battle, and each class of the archer has new starting cards, making the gameplay for each Vanadis class more unique. By the way, we didn't overlook the upgrade of pets in the camp. It has become more tangible compared to the previous version.
But Vanadis is not the only big rework we did. In fact, we introduced a new system in the form of an event journal and quest log. Initially, this was conceived as a major upgrade, so you could track all your actions in the game. But we haven't done that yet. I'll talk about it later. For now, we used the quest log creation to stop receiving negative feedback from people who die from Milanese right away. Actually, it's a joke. We had a lot of feedback that Milenis kills with one hit. Who designed such gameplay? But it's a plot idea, because there are many events in the game that allow you to deal with Milenis and reveal more of the world's story. And now, to make it clearer and more obvious, we added them to the quest log. And it describes what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. I hope this will make our idea, which we put into the game about this confrontation, clearer. We await your feedback on how much more interesting and understandable it has become. And of course, your reviews on Steam help us a lot. Among other things, we slightly revealed the relationship between Percival and Sigismund. Because Sigismund, in previous versions of the game, was such a passing boss about whom nothing was known, except go and kill him. Therefore, the writers invested in the story of the relationship between Percival and his, well, not brother, but his friend, let's say Sigismund, to explain their conflict more, and to engage you more in the story of these characters. We changed the save system because the game was divided into story mode and free run, and so that you could progress within each of them simultaneously and switch between story mode and free runs to test a build, a class, or perhaps develop a character better. We divided the saves into two separate ones. one for runs and one for stories. And you also have a third save, your overall game progress. Accordingly, now when you find new items, cards, etc. in runs, they will also go into the glossary. And if you progress in runs and earn general rewards, new starting items for characters, or maybe unlock some cool new cards, you will now also get these items in story mode and can find them in loot, drops from chests, and so on. The same applies in reverse. If you achieve some progress in the story, get a new item that can now drop from chests, you will also see it in free run mode. But since we touched on runs in the save system, I wanted to talk a little about our plans for the future. We are currently working very hard on runs, and want to surprise you with what we come up with. Previously, runs were just a test for your build, to test some aspect of the game. We have now deepened this a bit. We added a skill tree for each character, which will increase the game's difficulty with each level, and more. Make requirements for completing one of the branches of the tree for a specific class. In the end, you will receive rewards that you can then use in story mode, or again in runs for another class. I hope we will be able to implement all this in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and you will see it and try it out on the test servers, and then, as usual, we will see it live. Among other things, we will bring back the daily runs, which are now being slightly reworked, because due to some changes, some data was not being saved on the server. We are now finalizing this, tweaking the layout a bit, and will return with updated daily challenges.
And now we smoothly approach the most delicious part of the conversation about the world of knock on the coffin lid. Recently, one player fed our game's localization file to artificial intelligence and asked it to form the game's lore. If you haven't read it, there will be a link under this video. Be sure to read it. It's very interesting. Well, I think we can comment on what was true and what was not quite. Guys, it's your turn. And let's try to do it without spoilers.
Well, I thought there would be more spoiler information and other stuff. So basically, there is none of that. AI just chewed the lore and retold it briefly. But I think there are many interesting spoilers in the localization that AI didn't fit in. Apparently, AI didn't understand that this is very important information.
I think the AI read everything and gathered the essence that was there. Each event wasn't identified as an event with development, and it apparently thought it was something unclear and removed it. But it got the essence, although we didn't talk about it anywhere directly. It wasn't explicitly written that Mortis chewed it at some point. But how it was able to determine where the essence is and where the side quest is not very clear. So it turned out to be a very brief retelling of the lore, specifically about what happens in the world. But the plot itself wasn't spoiled. That's actually cool. Let's move on to the developers' questions. I pass the word to Nastia.
Users literally bombarded us with questions, and it was actually quite difficult to choose the best ones, as they are all very good and interesting. What inspired the world of the game? What inspired the writing of the script, the creation of the characters? What books, movies, or games did you have to watch, play, or maybe re-watch and replay?
It's hard to pinpoint a specific source of inspiration, but I can say that initially, I laid the foundation for a virtual universe, like Warhammer, for example, or Star Wars. Something unlimited by the framework of the game, but with the potential for growth. Well, and The Lord of the Rings, or the Noon Universe by the Strugatsky.
Here, I guess, it should be said that the world as a whole is inspired, particulars, I think.
Particulars. Particulars are easy. Particulars are the designer's work. The game designer comes and says, we need such a hero with such functions. And I fit the hero into the game world according to these functions so that he looks organic there and obeys the logic of the world.
Let's give some examples. So we understand that we need 6 elite enemies for elves, and 6 elite enemies for dwarves. And the guys come up with the mechanics. We have a guy with multi-attack who changes mode, and Stas says, let it be an elf on a bear who, when killed, gets off the bear and fights. And the elf will be some kind of cool elf warrior in the 3rd generation, who is constantly looking for an enemy for training. Something like that, I suppose.
Yes, or the most vivid example is Milenis. When a boss was needed after Sigismund, he should be like this, like this, like this. I immediately associated him with Mortis. I liked this idea and started developing it. I say, will this go? Yeah, great. It will go into production.
How, apart from being inspired by other works, can you pave your own path and come up with something unique?
Each of us, when reading, getting acquainted with other creations, reads a book and often puts meanings into it that were not initially embedded. Everyone probably knows this. This is a creative element. Another example is just reading. Reading is a creative process. We don't get everything from a book. We visualize, comprehend, add meaning with our personal experiences, and build a whole picture ourselves. This is creativity.
It seems to me that it is difficult to come up with something unique in plot matters, because this is everyday life. All these events, if they didn't happen to us, then somewhere they did. I mean that any script action is always some interpretation of Hamlet, roughly speaking, or other events that have already happened. Situations change where this happens. The main characters change, their characters, and so this all layers and creates a unique picture and event.
You need to rely on the experience of generations and try to jump higher because we are still moving up and forward. Despite the fact that everything has already been invented before us.
It seems to me that we, in our own way, did something unique because making event development in loops from 3 different characters, from 3 different perspectives, was quite complicated. Can anyone name an example of where this exists off the top of their head right now? Write in the comments if you know.
How did the idea of the universe's lore and the racial diversity of the characters themselves come about?
Initially, there was 1 character, but the game designers decided to expand to 3. They wanted to expand for gameplay reasons, and I thought, if we expand to 3, we can give them different characters and different moral guidelines, different types of behavior. Why not, when yes? That's how it was.
The brightest example is when you have Percival, a more noble warrior relatively to the world around him, fighting for a right cause, and then right after him goes Bjorn, who's like, smash, destroy, nah. He doesn't have the option to spare or kill. His choices are kill this way or kill with extra brutality.
Yes, but Bjorn allowed us to have fun. We didn't distort his personality. It remained exactly as intended. It just gave us many opportunities for fun, and we implemented all of that in his events.
We had a lot of fun with Bjorn. He was such a rascal, especially after Percival, who was as stiff as a poker. Bjorn was absolutely the opposite, and it was fun.
Yes, but Bjorn allowed us to have fun. We didn't distort his personality. It remained exactly as intended. It just gave us many opportunities for fun, and we implemented all of that in his events.
I understand that the world of Midian is not about elves and dwarves at all. It is much wider and larger. We won't spoil our next game releases because we have huge plans and ideas for the lore. But let's say you've seen references to other eras in this world in the game, so the guys wanted a medieval and a bit of dark fantasy setting. That's why we have elves, dwarves, and other creatures now. The world is much bigger, and I understand that answering this question, we can say that this was just a requirement of the producers, the then artist, the game designer, to have such a setting, and that's why Stas made this choice.
Well, not quite like that. Not quite. Actually, the game world was conceived before the game itself. It all came through scaling. The big picture, visible in its entirety but from afar, was moving towards the small details. We take the largest scale. Who created the world? Who are the antagonists? Why did it all start? How will it all end? The pantheon of gods. This is the huge foundation on which you can build anything. And further, yes, as we scale closer, 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 it's more of my colleagues' work. Game designers need elves, will make elves, cult of the might, goblins, orcs. Game designers need arcs for each biome, the confrontations between elves and dwarves. All of this should be interesting and filled with details. Originally, the war between the elves and dwarves started precisely because of the killing of Ingvar. Ingvar held the dwarves in check, and when he died, his brother Sigismund didn't want to restrain the dwarves. The dwarves said, "Oh, okay, now we finally can. Hands are untied," and went after the elves. The elves were outraged and declared humans traitors. This was from the very beginning. The other thing is that it was described in a couple of travel notes, and we didn't plan to describe it deeper. But if we want deeper, we can go deeper.
It's easier to expand events through characters rather than specific events. Events are quite uninteresting by themselves. Some elf gets stuck in a swamp and needs to be rescued. To expand it, we had to come up with, first of all, what is the elf doing there? How did he end up in the swamp? It's not his biome. Why did he come here? Through different characters, through different events, we find out why he came. This opens up a huge chunk of lore, really big, that the player can uncover for the characters in the DLC even more. This generated even more content in the swamps, in the steppes related to goblins. That's how connected everything turned out to be, quite unexpectedly.
So it turns out that characters appear and are born, because sometimes, aside from what Stas said, we just need to develop a character, and for that we need someone to interact with. This way it generates new characters, and then these characters also need to interact, so we continue to tie something to them. This chain of plot changes leads to our artists not keeping up with drawing events. And that's it.
Something like that, yes. Although it was quite easy to do, revealing all this was relatively easy because all events were initially set in place. If a character is in his place, even an elf who is not in his biome could be there. All this wasn't originally intended to be revealed, but that doesn't mean everything was slapped together chaotically. All events and characters are part of a whole. All figures are in their places, and if you need to reveal them, let's reveal them.
That's how we ended up with a number of lines equal to Baldur's Gate 1.
How do the scriptwriters work during game development? What are they responsible for, and who do they interact with?
I am responsible for ensuring that the whole vinaigrette that everyone came up with comes together into one story and one world. That's the main thing I'm responsible for.
People come to you and say, "Hi, we need a boss robot helicopter." And you say, "Yes, a boss helicopter doesn't fit into my setting. I suggest an orc with a propeller trying to fly." They say, "No, an orc with a propeller would be like Carlson on the roof. How about he jumps off a mountain?" You answer, "Well, let's have him jump off a mountain." And that's kind of how it happens, as I understand it.
Sometimes Alex comes to me and says, "Listen, we came up with an awesome thing and it would play great, but it doesn't fit into our story at all. If you figure out how it fits, it would be super." But everyone interacts with everyone. There's no way around it. For example, I came up with a great story, but the artist can't draw it beautifully. He says it would look ugly, so we won't do it. Let's come up with something else that will look good. Another example is a game designer comes and says, "This will play great." And I say, "This isn't about our game." He says, "Let's figure out how to make it fit our game." So, interaction is constant. Everyone with everyone.
How much does the script change in the project before and after development? And what sometimes has to be sacrificed?
Nothing, fortunately, had to be sacrificed, but that's precisely because the cool foundation rules. If you don't want to rewrite anything, lay everything out from the very beginning. Therefore, nothing had to be sacrificed. Everything just got supplemented, filled with details and specifics. And that's it. The foundation has been unshakable from the very beginning.
No, sometimes we had to sacrifice something. For example, you see the event Injured Brother, where Bjorn takes the bicorn from him. But we think, there's no bicorn in the art, but it's definitely lying somewhere nearby because all the Brothers of Fire have bicorns. And then we make a tutorial where this hero immediately goes without a bicorn, and we're outraged.
No, but if you talk about such trifles, well, in essence, it doesn't matter what reward to give the character, because they didn't draw the bicorn and had to give him another reward. That's not a sacrifice. Absolutely not. These are some trifles, details, adjustments. That's filing work, as it's called.
And it's great. I think it's just wonderful to think everything through from the very beginning so that it's not painfully hard later.
It's not thought out, it's applied with broad strokes and great potential. I call them connectors in my work. I leave as many connectors as possible so that something can be added to them. And you don't even need to develop everything. The more you develop unnecessary details that aren't needed at the moment, the worse it is. It's better not to develop them, because when you need to work on it, it might already be done, and you'll have to cut it all off, sacrifice it, and rewrite everything from scratch. You need to understand everything in general terms and roughly imagine how it can be developed in different directions. Here and there, you can add something, leave something for later, and then you can come up with something more. Go further, deeper.
What tools do game designers and scriptwriters use to build and link all parts of the story, events with connections and morality? Is there a 3D map of the interconnections between all the elements of the game?
The tool's called Figma, but essentially it's just a mind map. There's a special tool in the Unity engine that allows creating mind maps inside the engine and connecting them directly to events. However, when we started creating complex branches and events in their further development, we didn't know about the existence of such a tool. And when we learned about it, the programmer we had at that time said it was impossible to do in our case. So I took out Figma, described the concept in Figma, how I wanted our events to work. Drew a couple of examples, like here it's like this, here it's like that. We built it from that. So there's an event, the text of the event, possible branches, how they're connected, where they lead, connections to other events, and all of that. Here's an item you need. It comes from this event. And we ended up with such a complex network in Figma, but we don't recommend it. I mean, this particular method, it's definitely better to use specialized tools rather than trying to draw chains in Paint. Embedding texts there, and then extracting them into localization files, etc. These were our tools. You could call it makeshift with improvised means. If you could see the map hanging on the wall behind Stas to the left, I once brought it there to show everything, like, you stick a pin here, wrap a thread around it, connect it to this element, and the map should be like a network. But in the end, Figma helped us avoid all that.
Yes, Figma is not a bad tool if everything were simple. But we have everything complicated, and now Figma is a real mess. So probably no one can figure it out without my help. But I navigate it well, and when I need to write a new text, I immediately go into Figma. I look for all the texts that can connect to this text, making sure not to write anything that would contradict what I've already written. It helps, but you need a keeper of knowledge. For example, I don't keep all the game designer's activities in my head. I constantly bother them with questions. When it concerns me, I immediately turn to Michael, Alex, and they constantly bother me with law questions too, and we explain to each other what's really going on.
As I understand it, the story was initially quite simple, but after the early access release, you decided to develop ideas not just with different characters, but also with different moral choices.
We didn't aim for the game to have your choices strictly affect the ending. We had a negative ending with a fight against Mortis. But it was hidden, more like an Easter egg for those who wanted to dig deeper. But the fight turned out big. And we thought, why are we hiding it so much? Moreover, it fits into the concept that I won't spoil, but it reflects most on Mortis. The guys added moral choices that affect the ending and why they affect the ending. And now in the credits, when we release them, you'll see all the decisions you influenced, what they led to. We decided not to overload people after each run with this or that happened here. We'll leave it for the credits so that you can see what choices you made.
In the DLC, every decision will affect the ending.
Yes, exactly. And you can be for Vanadis, super kind and wanting everything to be great. Or be a real scoundrel who will betray and do anything to achieve their goals.
Were there any conflicts among the team due to different visions of certain events in the game's lore? How were these conflicts resolved if they occurred?
Well, I've already talked a bit about conflicts of interest. There's another type of conflict. Different visions of the result. We have the most such conflicts with Igor, because we have very different approaches to work. But there's nothing wrong with that, because if there's a conflict, it doesn't mean someone is wrong. Each person has a linear and discrete way of thinking, and everyone's is different. But reality is objectively non-linear and non-discrete. So, a conflict is just an opportunity to look at the world from another point of view. It's even cool. And if we're talking about flame, about emotions, it's great to understand that these are just work moments, and it doesn't affect relationships at all. And then you can flame, argue, raise your voice. I even like that.
I think truth is born in conflicts because you only get to the bottom of things through argument. Just calling them conflicts isn't right. It's a creative process, a discussion where everyone expresses their point of view. Only through this do you find some logical result, which leads to, I think, the same for scriptwriters and generally everywhere in collective work.
I'd say it's not conflicts, but discussions. Because when we were brainstorming, discussing things for a long time, it seemed that the result was always better and more interesting. When there was a conflict, we still tried to find a compromise, but in discussions, we supported each other's ideas, and they turned out better. That's how I remember it.
What was the most challenging part of the script?
The most challenging part was telling a story where the player will definitely see only the beginning and the end. Everything else they might see in any order or might not see at all. For example, a player might go to the Crimson Steps, not like it there, and spend the whole game going through the Rotten Bog, learning nothing about the Crimson Steps. Yet, the story still needs to come together, and of course, we can't create equally cool stories for all players. It will depend more on their desire and experience. But it's really hard, so hard that it's indescribable.
Why do we have travel notes, a quest log, and cutscenes? Because many players, even those playing story mode, don't want to read everything, but they still need to understand what's going on. In some games, this is done through side quests, short audio messages that you can't avoid, but are short. Quest logs tell you to go here because of this, go there because of that, so you at least understand the general story. And cutscenes are there for those who skip reading, but can watch a 20, 30-second cutscene and understand what's happening. I remember how we came to this. We watched someone play our game, and when a travel note started, the person skipped it. And it seems like we managed with that.
What are your favorite and least favorite characters and moments in the game?
I don't have any least favorite characters. I try to give even the nastiest characters some charm. For example, we have a cult keeper. Those who discover him will applaud what a scoundrel he is. But there's still something interesting about him. Though I wouldn't want to meet someone like that in real life.
My least favorites are the three dwarves on goats, because dwarves aren't very good on their own. And we couldn't develop their events properly. We struggled a lot with them. My favorites are the demonic advisor. Yes, for all the heroes, it's fun. And Graham from the Steps, a goblin trying to mimic Gorbigan.
Graham and Gorbigan? Yes, Graham and Gorbigan are cool. And the advisor is good too. Mortis is probably really great. I'd probably call Mortis my favorite after all.
I think Mortis is the most profound character. Very complex, with big goals, and mostly the best developed, so he's probably the overall favorite.
All right, let's start with the least favorite. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of the three witch sisters. Oh wait, 3 of them? Oh my, I've already forgotten how many there are. As a developer, I have access to localization and all that, so yes. I don't like those who torture people. Also, honestly, I'm not fond of demons. They're quite problematic guys. And that fat demon who demands our heroes to bow before him also annoys me. I really love the cheerful mushroom guy from the Rotten Bog. I actually love this biome. I usually never go to the Crimson Steppes. When I play, I walk through the bog. So, I love the cheerful mushroom guy. In principle, I even like the ritualist who asks our heroes to help get rid of cannibals. What else? Well, for example, I like the turmoil event because it's also interesting when you stand before the choice. Help the demons or help the Fire Brothers. What's your moral choice there? And in general, by the way, I really like the Fire Brothers. They're all so nice. Were there any personal stories that you decided to add to the game and did add?
Once in my childhood, I washed up in a puddle. That can somehow be linked to our puddle event, but...
So that's where it comes from.
You didn't drink from them, did you? Just washed up. No, but our event 3 Graves is based on real life. It's a story in the game's realities, but it's also a complete story from real life. And so, we tried, as the disclaimers say, that all coincidences are random. There are no connections with real life. So maybe just one event, I guess. If the others encountered or intersected somewhere, I think it's more of a coincidence.
Is it true that when creating Bjorn, you were inspired by Lycan from Dota?
I'll answer seriously. Bjorn was invented by the game designer. Well, he commissioned me to make this character. Maybe he was inspired by Lycan from Dota. But when I was scripting Bjorn, I definitely wasn't inspired by Lycan from Dota.
Well, I think what we were inspired by is quite noticeable. It's not hidden. So you can look at the father and son event, the same crazy alchemist. Bjorn was still conceived as an antagonist in his own way, an anti-hero to some extent, although you can certainly play him as a hero. So we needed to give him some charm of an anarchist, this elf anarchist, a bit crazy. So I think the writers didn't really take him from anywhere. The visual line taken by the artist could have references from somewhere, but I don't think it's directly from Dota.
But I think it's worth adding, as Stas rightly noted earlier, that it's all already kind of been invented before us. Elf, not uniqueness. Lycan, not uniqueness. Blue skin color, not uniqueness. Quite a tough character. That's not uniqueness either. Such characters exist everywhere. All these things are used everywhere. Well, we just combined everything. Added him fury, cruelty, and a bit of a nasty character. And that's how our dear beloved Bjorn turned out.
I think we'll end it here. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to say that the studio exists only thanks to Stas. Because in those tough times when everyone scattered and literally only 3 people were left, Stas was the only inspirer who said, "Hey, what are you doing? We've done so much cool stuff here. Let's not disband. We can make an awesome story with cool characters out of this. We already have everything for it. There's no need to fall apart just because some people decided there's no future in this or it's not their path." So let's applaud Stas. We're all gathered here because Stas inspired me too to continue further.
That's great! Well, thank you for being with us. We really hope you enjoyed this episode and found it very interesting. Support us with a like and a comment. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our social networks to not miss the news and even GIFs. With you were Andre, Stas, Igor, and Nastya. Bye, everyone!